This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, two souls searching for love in the great ocean we call life, Paul Jaisley.
Hey there, humanoids.
And Zach McCrary.
Good day, all.
Zach, you are our very special guest for this week's episode because we're going to be talking about comic books that break your heart. But for maybe the folks at home who haven't listened to your fantastic podcast that we've been plugging on the show the last couple of weeks, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the podcasts, plural, that you have going on.
Oh, well, thank you. And I appreciate you plugging the show. I've been plugging yours as well. I'm a big fan of what you guys do here. So my shows that I do, first and foremost, is The Comics That We Love, where myself and a different guest each week, we sit down and we talk about a comic book that made them a fan of comics or solidified that love, or sometimes I have people on who don't really read books, and I find something that I feel like matches their personality, and I introduce them to it, which has been fun too. And we do just real deep dives into like the writers and the artists, and we discuss. I like to think of it taking like an analytical swing, like we don't necessarily beat by beat on on what happens in each book, but we break down maybe like the subtext and why the art works perfectly for this scene or what they were trying to do there, and dig into the characters and what's going on with them and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. I love making that show. It makes me feel like the $50,000 English degree I got was worthwhile. So that's always nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then I do a show called Comics and Beer which just started with my pal Corey McLean, where we drink a lot of beer and we have more barroom talk. So I always tell people, I'm like, if you look at The Comics That We Love as like your college course, well, after college is done, you go down the street to the bar and you have bar talk with your friends. So that's pretty much what that show is. We keep that nice and light. We talk about superhero day jobs and the best super teams and what makes a super team crappy and why they get canceled, that kind of stuff. So yeah, Comics and Beer, The Comics That We Love, that's my shtick. Been a comic book fan all my life, and I like talking about them.
Hey, you know what? You are in a very welcoming group of people because, funny enough, that is what we love to do here at I Read Comic Books. We talk about comics.
I was really hoping. Yeah.
Well, we're very excited to have you. I'm very excited to talk comics with you. So let's just dive right into things. I've got two legally mandated questions that I have to ask. And I want to say before I ask them, I used this open AI thing very recently because AI is everything. And someone was like, you can copy your show's link from iTunes into this like aggregator and it'll create perfect show notes for you. And I was like, I don't believe that for a second. So of course I dropped in last week's episode that we had with Ari Gross. And one of the first points that it said was, I Read Comic Books is a comic book podcast talking about comic books. And I was like, okay, that sounds right.
Fair enough.
The second line was, and Mike Rapin is the host, and he has two legally mandated questions that he must ask every episode. And I was like, all right, we're getting it. and then of course it continued on and got everything else wrong, right? Like didn't understand that Ari was a person, didn't understand that they were what a Kickstarter was, and it like really focused on this thing that because I said legally mandated, it thought that the show had somehow like a political bent to it, and I was like, sort of, right? Like, right. But not really at all. So anyways, I just think it's funny that I've taken this joke that Paul made years and years ago and made it a staple of the show. And now AI thinks that we are a comic book political podcast. So those two legally mandated questions are sticking around, and they are, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Paul.
I've been doing well, Mike. We have a beautiful day here in West Michigan. For everyone waiting for another installment of the West Michigan Weather Watch, it is around mid-40s right now with beautiful sunshine. It does not feel like the middle of February, thankfully, here in Michigan. So I'm enjoying this, soaking in all that vitamin D as I can before the long stretch of March we have in store for us. So in terms of comics, I really read one thing, but it was a lot of comics. I have a lot of thoughts about it, and that is, of course, The Best of 2000 AD, Volume 2. I've raved about this series on the show before. I talked about the first volume at length. This Volume 2 was my pick last week for the top of my pile, and it's so good. I want to give a special shout out to Owen Johnson, who is the editor for this series. He's taking all this 45-year plus history of 2000 AD and try to streamline it into these best of collections. That's what we get here is a collection of 2000 AD material both new and old. And it's so amazing that they're able to kind of like get me hooked. You know, I'm already on board with Judge Dredd. So you get 2 Dredd stories in this collection. They give me some reprints of older 2000 AD stuff. They give me some more recent 2000 AD stuff. And every time I read one of these collections, I'm just blown away by how
Mhm.
good this stuff is. It's like, it feels like the secret history of comics. If you didn't grow up reading it, if you're not from England, you kind of don't know what 2000 AD is. You just know Judge Dredd. And it's
Right.
amazing how good this stuff is. So it's kind of nice to be let in on the secret in a way to know how
Mhm.
great this stuff is. So I really enjoyed the second volume, like I said. And I think Nemesis the Warlock might be my new favorite comic. We get like 80
What?
pages of Nemesis the Warlock in this
Oh
collection.
man.
But before I get to that, I should mention we get, like I said, 2 Dredd stories, one new and one classic. The newer Dredd story is written by Al Ewing with art by Colin Wilson, and it's great. You know, Al Ewing wrote it; it's going to be great. It
Right.
features the judges investigating a series of random assassinations that are happening in Mega City 1. Turns out there's like these rich, like bloodthirsty thrill kill like addicts are using these like remote controlled bullets to just kill random citizens, and the judges have to find out who's doing it.
Oh Jesus.
There's a great moment where like it's a younger, newer judge is kind of taking control of the investigation, and Dredd keeps saying like, if you don't think you're up for it, I'll take over, but it's your case if you want it. And the guy's like, no, I got it. And then at one point, Dredd saying like, you know, it's very common for judges on one of their early cases, there'll be a case that really nags them, that really drives them crazy, they can't quite figure out, and that, you know, will haunt them for the rest of their career. And the
Mhm.
judge says like, ask Dredd like, oh, did you have a case like that? And Dredd's like, well, no, but I've heard that that's a thing. Like I've heard that's happening. So it's a very fun story. The classic Judge Dredd story is an old reprint written by Alan Grant with art by Mike McMahon. And if we're going to be ranking Judge Dredd artists, like Mike McMahon is like top 2 or 3 for me. Just beautiful
Mhm.
looking strip. And it's about the judges fighting a space vampire. Like, what more do you want? Judge Dredd, space vampires, classic.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, we're getting the thumbs up from Brian in the booth. So yeah.
Yeah, it's great stuff. There's also the second part of the Brink storyline by Dan Abnett and Ian J. Culberd. The
Mhm.
first collection had, you know, the first couple chapters of that story. This features the next chapters of it. And it's crazy because that story in the first collection just felt like a like murder mystery that's set in the future in space where like Earth has been destroyed and people are living in these like satellites around what used to be Earth.
Sure.
This second part of the story takes that in a far different direction. It's like Dan Abnett saying like, oh, you thought this was a detective story? No. It's something much bigger and much scarier. I don't want to give anything away. If you want like a sci-fi fueled mystery detective story, Brink is fantastic.
Yeah, someone on Twitter recently reached out to me about this and said that it was super solid. I don't know.
Mhm.
I've heard really positive things about this from like non 2000 AD readers. So,
Yeah, I think it's really great. And no, these collections will have the first, like basically the first book worth of stories in that. And I think it
Sure.
ran like 4 or 5 volumes that you can pick
Mhm.
up digitally through 2000 AD, which I'm going to be doing just so I can finish the story.
Nice.
But the highlight, like I said, is like 80 pages of classic Nemesis the Warlock stories from the early 80s, written by Pat Mills, art by the late, great Kevin O'Neill. And I've known about this. It's one of those strips that I've like heard the name of, having read about 2000 AD, but I've never actually read Nemesis the Warlock. And it's so much fun. I was blown away by how good this stuff was. The
What is Nemesis the Warlock? Like
Well,
I'm
I was about
Googling
to
and I'm
ask
just
the
seeing
same
like a
thing.
dragon. Like I just see pictures of dragons. I'm like, is this another case of Paul liking fantasy stories and just refusing to admit that he might like fantasy stories?
sort of. So the title character Nemesis is this demonic looking alien. He's really tall. He's got cloven hooves. He's got horns, but he's a rebel fighting against an evil galactic empire run by the Grand Inquisitor named Torquemada. And very early on in the strip, we find out that Torquemada, who uses his Terminators to like eliminate alien life across the galaxy, is actually a human. And the planet where his empire is based, Termite, is a future version of Earth. So, in all of his, well-known subtlety, Pat Mills has created a comic where the titular hero is an alien who wants to destroy humanity. Like that's like humans are evil, and the demonic-looking alien is the hero, and he has to destroy humanity. It's so fantastic and over the top and ridiculous.
Hell yeah.
But so you mentioned the artwork, and like that's what makes it work is Kevin O'Neill's artwork. It's like it combines sci-fi with fantasy. It's horrific and humorous at the same time in the way that only Kevin O'Neill could do. I don't know how he does it. There's like panels where he draws spaceships and just like, yeah, that spaceship looks evil. Like, I don't know how a spaceship can actually look like possessed and evil, but somehow he does it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a fantastic book. It's very funny at times. It's not subtle, very heavy-handed, an allegory for racism, how these humans are like seeking to destroy all non-human life in the galaxy, and like Nemesis, the one person that can stop them. Torquemada is kind of drawn to be like a futuristic Klansman, like this long, like pointy, like like mask he wears, that. Like the hood and all that. So it's an allegory for racism. It's not subtle, but it's also very, very funny. And one thing I noticed is like in these 2000 AD collections, before every like big reprint of classic material, they'll have a critical essay explaining the context for the story. And the writer for this essay points out that Kevin O'Neill's artwork kind of looks like Mad Magazine. And I never made that connection. There's a lot of Jack Davis in Kevin O'Neill in this era. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jack Davis. He did a lot of work for Mad Magazine. He did a lot of commercial artwork. If you know his style, you'll see it everywhere in movie posters and album covers from the 60s and 70s. But he also worked for EC Comics in the 50s and did a lot of the very graphic, horrific horror and crime comics. And that's what Kevin O'Neill's channeling. It's like this thing where it's not explicitly like violent, but it just looks kind of like dangerous in a way.
Sure.
I'm 40 years old, and there are times I'm reading Nemesis the Warlock thinking, I really hope my parents don't catch me reading this. It feels like the comics you don't want anyone to know you're reading. It feels dangerous and subversive in a way that comics very rarely do these days. And I was just blown away. I can only imagine being an 8-year-old kid in England and having your brain absolutely fried by Kevin O'Neill and Pat Mills. So,
sure.
It's great stuff. It very taps into the sort of like punk and thrash metal aesthetic from the 80s that I like. I can imagine like Glenn Danzig wearing a Nemesis the Warlock t-shirt back in 87. So I love this stuff. I'm going to have to buy the rest of the collections. And that's what these 2000 AD collections are great at. Like every time I finish one of the chapters of them, there's the ad like, hey, if you want to continue the story, here's the next volume to buy. I was like, sold. So there you go. Nemesis the Warlock gets my highest possible recommendation.
That's too cool. I there's an ongoing joke on my show because when I'm researching the authors and artists, like every single time when I come across someone from England, they always get their start at 2000 AD. So that's just become an ongoing thing. It's like drink if I talk about 2000 AD. And it really has me curious to read some of this because it's always been in my periphery. I know that it's important. It's important to comics. 2000 AD is, and honestly, and I'm gonna just give you the pat on the back, Paul. But like listening to this show and hearing you talk about 2000 AD really has me wanting to buy those books that you've got there. I really want to check some of that out. And like I'm always a little hesitant because I'm always worried someone's going to buy something and not like it. But if you have any interest, like these collections, the best of are a great way to start. If you like sci-fi, if you like sci-fi comics, I mean, I don't think you'll be disappointed. So it gets my guarantee. So don't hesitate. All right.
This is a different thing than my guarantee, where I will literally pay you back if you hate the book that I read. But we're not there yet with Paul's recommendations. We'll get there one day, I think. Yeah. But no, I'm also in the same boat though, Zach. Like I feel like the more I hear about 2000 AD, the more I'm just like, you know what? These digital collections are $15 and it's like 450 pages, and why not? I've had a blast reading the Judge Dredd stuff that I've gotten, as well as someone recommended reading Strontium Dogs, and I'm like in that book now. That book is dense, but it's like if I ever just need something to read, I can put 8 or 16 or 24 pages in real quick and feel like I read a lot, even though it's only 24 pages. But like those stories are so jam-packed with action, and especially in that first volume, like Carlos Esqueda is like trying to outdo himself every issue with like the wacky crazy shit that he's doing. So I mean, I feel like you can't really go wrong with 2000 AD, but maybe that's because they've curated themselves to like get rid of some of the maybe less than good stories. I don't know. I
mean, I'm sure that if you are reading as the stuff's coming out, there's going to be winners and there's going to be, flops. That's, that's just the nature of it. I'm sure like if you read a shonen manga or anything that's got that anthology feel, there's going to be the ones that really shine and the ones that just kind of fall to the wayside. But
totally.
That's what sounds so cool about these, is that it sounds like they're giving you the winners of the eras,
Yeah.
some really good modern stuff, some really good classic stuff, to show you like this is what 2000 AD is really all about,
Yeah. It
which
turns out
I think is cool.
it's more than just Judge Dredd, which was a big surprise.
Turns out for years that's all I knew it for,
Right. Yeah.
as an American.
Yeah. Well, I guess Zach, let's move over to you. How have you been? How have comic books been? What have you been reading?
Oh man, I have been great. I am. We were talking just before the show about your adventures in hotel booking. I'm in a similar boat. I'm about to go to Vietnam for a month, and
Whoa.
so I am in the thick of planning that out and getting hotels and all that kind of stuff with my
Cool.
fiance. So that's been fun. But other than that, reading a lot of comics. And one of the comics I thought would be fun to talk about on here is one that I backed on Kickstarter and just recently got the second issue for. It is called Worlds Away. It is by Damian Becton and art by Christian Prunesti, colors by Luana Christini, and letters by Reed Hinckley Barnes. So Damien came on my show to push the Kickstarter for the second issue, which is how I found out about this comic. And he gave me the first in preparation. And I honestly, I've got this rule. I'm glad I haven't had to use it yet. But if someone wants to come on my show to like talk up their Kickstarter comic, I want to make sure that I like it first, because I don't want them to come on if I don't like it. I don't want to pretend,
Sure.
that feels like a disservice to them in a way, and I don't want to do that. But thankfully that's never had to happen. But when I read this issue, I from the get-go was totally in, and it felt like it, and I've told him this, it felt like it should have that little eye in the corner or the Dark Horse emblem. Like, it's that well written. The art is beautiful. I see it as the art to me, it feels like if you could make Akira Toriyama and Fiona Staples do a fusion dance, that's kind of, it's somewhere in between there. Like that's me
That's
anyway.
wild.
Like between the art itself and the colors and just the palette that's used for the comic. I think it's just a ton of fun. It's a heartwarming sci-fi story. It's really relatable. Like I like sci-fi that it gives you like the cool aliens and robots and stuff, but I want it to be a story that is still grounded and relatable. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like at the core, it's got to be something that I can still feel and get behind, and that's what he does here. It's a story of a family that was torn apart because the husband he dies before the book opens, and the cool thing about it is it's got, you ever see that Pixar movie Up, where it starts really happy and then boom, wife dies, and you're just broken for a second or two. It kind of does that. I'm just gonna, Damien won't mind if I spoil a little bit of issue 1, but so the book opens up with this great scene of the husband / father recanting the story of meeting his wife and falling in love with her, and like the deep, really I should have used this for later on in the show, but the fall in love with her and then having this child and the amazing feeling of that. And then before we move into like the actual like full story, he basically makes like the ultimate sacrifice kind of thing to protect his family. And so we are left then a few years later with angsty teen daughter and mom, and they both are in this place where they still neither of them have fully come to terms with what has happened,
Mm-hmm.
with the loss of the father or husband, with the loss of this person. And at the same time, the daughter is at this right age where her and mom are button heads. Mom just wants the best for her kid, but she's not good at, communicating that. That was dad's
Sure.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, but at the same time, they have crash landed on this planet that they know nothing about. And now they have to try and find their way off. And mom is just trying to keep her daughter safe and get them out of there. And at the same time, this teenage girl is just not having it. She feels disrespected. Mom doesn't trust me. All the things that you get out of family dynamics and drama. And at the same time, you've got like this little AI robot that is trying to be mediator between the two of them in a way. It's got kind of
Great.
a Skeets Booster Gold vibe, and it's a fun book. It's got a lot of cool action, and like I said, at the core, it's just this very nice family drama where you want to see these two finally come together and finally find that middle ground, and you also want to see them both get off this planet alive. Like that, for me, that is kind of the crux of it. Is I'm worried about Mom. I don't, because it's very clear that she's willing to do whatever it takes, and I hope she doesn't have to in the end. It's 2 issues deep. He is actually he's going to be running a Kickstarter here in like a I think in like a I want to say the beginning of March, I think, for the final 2 issues. It's going to be a 4-issue thing, and you can get all 4 of them together. He didn't pay me to do this as an ad or anything like that, but it's a really fun comic. It was a heartwarming sci-fi tale, and yeah, worlds away. I just read the 2nd issue, and hey, Damien, it's really good.
Well, that sounds really cool. Love me a good Kickstarter comic. I was looking at the art. The pitch is like Radiant Black and Power Rangers and God of War. I totally can see that in the style. That sounds really cool. I'll have to check out the Kickstarter when the next one comes out.
Cool.
Well, for me, I've been all right. As Zach said, I was busy trying to figure out stuff for Gen Con. So if you're going to Gen Con this year, I'll give you a button or a pin if I see you there. But otherwise, yeah, I've read a handful of books. I got caught up on some of I should say I did read the Storm and the Brotherhood, like Sins of Sinister offshoot universe stuff that's happening. It's pretty good. I'm kind of just gonna wait until that whole event is done before I talk about it, because I feel like I don't have a good grip on it, and I kind of hate how complicated it's gotten already just 2 issues in. But we'll see if it all like sells itself out by the end of it. They've introduced the idea of a Mr. Sinister who has instead of a diamond on his forehead, he has a spade, which implies that there's potentially a heart and a club like Sinister. And I love the idea of the deck of cards being played into this, but then how does this factor into like the whole X-Men universe of like there's the club with the Black Knight and the Black King and the White Queen, and it's like, I don't know, it's all over the place. And Hellfire Club, that's what I'm thinking of.
Club, yeah.
Anyways, so I did read some other books that I'm actually excited to talk about. One being Usagi Yojimbo Volume 7, Jen's Story. This is by Stan Sakai. I think it's the last volume published by Fantagraphics, and I don't really have too much to say about it other than like 7 volumes in. Stan Sakai's series is fantastic. If you haven't read it, I mean, it's been out for 40 plus years. It's amazing. And this volume in particular adds some fun backstory and some throwback to old characters. You start to see Stan saying like, hey, I've established all of this lore. Now let's kind of play with it a little bit. I've got this whole, these characters that have come in and out of the story. A couple of trickster people. We've got this Usagi who's like a Ronin kind of running on his own, and then there's this other guy who's like a bounty hunter who has this mysterious past named Jen. And it's a really fun volume, because I think Stan, instead of doing just a series of little mini stories, decided to do a more fuller, well-told arc in this volume, and I love it. Like the previous volumes were great, but at the end of the day, 7 volumes in, I'm wondering, can Stan miss? I don't think so. So if you haven't read it, like Usagi Yojimbo is like probably one of the best comics you could ever pick up. But yeah, highly recommend it, especially if you're like me and had just watched like 3 Kurosawa movies in a row, and you were like, I need more of this. And then I picked up this series. Like it's a perfect combination, because Sakai, he totally just rips off Kurosawa stories and turns them into a story about a rabbit. But there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. It's a lot of fun. Love that. Loving it so far. I'm probably going to start snagging the Dark Horse volumes as I get them. It's pretty great. I do have volume 8 like ready for me at the library, so looking forward to that. But Zach, did you read anything else that you want to talk about before I jump into the last book on my pile that will shock everybody as to what I read?
Well, the last thing is not a book, but a million books, because I just recorded an episode of my show for the Dark Web series, the event, the X-Men Spider-Man event that just happened over at Marvel, just wrapped up at the beginning of February. And here's the thing. So I am a lifelong, unapologetic Ben Reilly nut. Like, Ben Reilly is my guy. He is my favorite character in Marvel. And so, at the end of the Beyond Spider-Man arc, which I both loved and was heartbroken by at the very end with everything that happens to Ben, because he really is he is that character that Marvel likes to kick when he's down. And so I had to read this with Ben going full chasm and being this villain now, and teaming up with Maddie Pryor, who is, you know, the clone of Jean Grey. So you got these two clones whose lives are so similar but have never crossed paths. And when you hear that they're teaming up, it's like, this makes so much sense that these two would be an echo chamber for each other's pain in a way, because no one can understand what they've gone through like each other at this point. And so I was on board for this story. I love the allusions to the Inferno story arc from X-Men back in the late 80s. It's got some fun Ghostbusters vibes, because I mean, only Marvel could take demons are attacking Manhattan and eating people and make it fun and kind of light, you know, because at the same time as this carriage turns into a demon and is swallowing the people that were sitting in it, it's cracking a joke, and you're like, you rascal. And stuff like that keeps happening with I think it was Spider-Man was fighting maybe Venom, and they knock over a scooter, and the scooter's on its side, and it's like, hey, what do I have to do with this? Could someone come over and stand me up? You know, that kind of stuff. And it's ridiculous, and it's fun, even though it's demons eating people in New York City. It was a fun time, but at the same time, it was able to hit on a lot of different emotional levels, especially if you read some of the tie-ins, because the main crux of it is Amazing Spider-Man and Dark Web X-Men. And Dark Web X-Men is phenomenal. The art, the story, because it focuses more on Madeline and her trauma, and basically, you know, falling in love with Cyclops, having his child, and then he just runs off to play with his old ex-buddies and leaves her, you know, and then, you know, gets back together with the now alive again Jean Grey. That's great. And so it deals with a lot of her trauma and coming to terms with that, because she's and then her and Jean having, you know, come to a head and having to talk it out. And at the same time, you've got Ben, who is dealing with similar traumas, and again, no one really wants to help Ben. Like Maddie, like people want to help Maddie, no one wants to help poor Ben. And the story was fun. It had it hit me on a lot of different emotional levels, because even with the laughs, there is a lot of serious stuff happening with these poor characters who have been through so much, and you kind of get why they're doing what they're doing. Are they taking it too far by trying to, you know, take over Manhattan? Yeah. But, you know, they are broken people. They have been broken over Maddie since the 80s, Ben since the 90s, and you kind of get why they are the way they are and why they feel the way they feel with everything that they've gone through. So I thought it was a really fun story. Even the tie-ins were good. The Venom ones were good. The Ms. Marvel was meh, but I did love that they again went full Ghostbusters and had her mosque become a demon walking through New York and climbing buildings. and the crux of that one was all like, if you just talk to it and let it say its piece, because it was just mad about things that were happening in the mosque, and they were like, cool, we'll fix those things, and then everything was cool. It was fun.
Interesting. I very much was hesitant, because I feel like a Spider-Man X-Men crossover to me just smells like, I don't know, Marvel trying to just farm single issues. But you're not the first person to say that this is actually a pretty good event. I didn't realize that Zeb Wells was at the helm of this, which kind of gives me like some good feelings, especially given how kick-ass his Hellions run was over at the X-Men, like in the X-Men camp. So maybe when this all gets collected, I'm in a series of misnumbered and misordered single issues. Maybe I'll grab this. Or maybe it'll actually be a hardcover that's in order. Who knows? That
would be cool. Yeah. I mean, this is it. What I like about this event is that it is not the massive scope, world-changing thing where you have to have 78 different titles if you want to glean the full story. Yeah, right. Like, yes, there are some extra bits in the extra, like the Ms. Marvel and the Venom and stuff like that. It helps, but you don't need it. Like, the core of this book is Amazing Spider-Man and the 3 X-Men tie-in, and they are called Dark Web X-Men. And then there's the bookends, Dusk and Dawn, that are just Dark Web Dusk, Dark Web Dawn. And it stays in that little thing. It stays in Manhattan. It is these characters. And, you know, other than poor Ben Reilly, everything gets to go back to the status quo after it's over. So it was a fun event, except for Ben. God, I swear, like that guy can't catch a break. He really can't.
I know about this much about Ben Reilly, so all I can hear of is like, yeah, he's just another clone. Who cares? Which I'm sure is not helping, right?
No.
I'm leaving. That's it. I'm done here.
Oh man, well, it sounds interesting. I think you've maybe pushed me over the edge to at least maybe dip my toes into this dark web stuff, because I've read pretty much every other X-Men thing that's come out since the Krakoa era. So like, maybe I'll dive in. We'll see. I do have one more book that I want to talk about before we jump into the top of our pile, and that is Batman: One Bad Day, the Riddler, #1. I know this came out a little while ago, but I was looking at a preview art for it, and I was like, that Mitch Gerads, he can kind of draw some nice comic books. And of course, it's Tom King, and like, it's 60-40 with that guy, But anyway, so this story here, if you don't know, is like, Riddler has done the absolute worst and has continued to do the absolute worst. He's the smartest person in all of Gotham, and Batman has to somehow stop him. That's like the baseline. But what this story does is just go as dark as humanly possible with a character like the Riddler, going like, and also elaborating on a fake Gotham or a different alternate Gotham where like Jim Gordon is like kind of a garbage person, and like Batman feels powerless and he's not going to kill anybody, and so the Riddler just gets to live this life of like just murdering anybody that he wants because he's so smart. And there's like this through line of the story of the Riddler is the Riddler because he needs to know everything. I really like the way that Tom King kept hammering that into the story. And you got these just beautiful flashbacks that Drads drew that are just like heartbreaking almost. Like you actually almost feel bad for Edward Nygma to a certain extent until you see him like switch over from like, oh man, everyone's so mean to me, to just I'm a sociopath now. Like something happens and the kid just goes from poor kid to sociopath. Yeah, like again, this to me feels like a book that was pitched as like, we know that there are Batman fans and there are readers out there who want the darkest, grittiest Gotham you can think of, that's full of murder and full of like, I'm so smart level characters that like you can't do anything to me. And we're going to give them Mitch Gerads to draw this book, and it's going to be the most beautiful, horrible thing like all together in one. This almost reminds me of Ruins by Warren Ellis and Teresa Nielsen, Cliff Nielsen, and Chris Moeller. It's an old series from the 90s that is kind of like a parody of the Marvel's series that came out by Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek, right? And or was it not Kurt Busiek?
No. Yeah.
Oh, it was. Okay, it was. Yeah, I for some reason, anyways. So that book came out, Marvel's came out, and it's this wonderful story about the origins of the Marvel characters. And Warren Ellis does this book, and it's like, well, what if like all of the rules of real life actually applied, right? Like, how is it possible for the Thing to be made out of bricks? Or like, when the Hulk shows up, he is like an irradiated mess that literally just kills people because they're around him, every horrible thing. Like Spider-Man doesn't look like a normal human. He's got these horrible arachnid features. Like, think of every awful thing that you could apply to any of the superheroes that you know and love. And Warren Ellis and the creative team do that in this book. And that's, to me, maybe not as extreme where this Riddler book goes, but it does feel like that kind of idea. Like, from a storytelling perspective, how far and twisted can we make the Riddler? And that's where like the book goes. I thought it was an enjoyable read, but it is dark, and it does suffer from, like, despite being 88 pages, having this oh no, I need to wrap things up montage that like kind of takes the really, really well paced first 3/4 and then speeds it up until we get to the end, and there's a nice switcheroo that I thought was fun. Very classic Batman shit that is just enjoyable as a Batman reader. So yeah, I really think that it's pretty fun. It's not groundbreaking. It's gorgeous to look at, and Mitch Gerads should be put in jail for drawing Bruce Wayne as John Hamm. That's because he does it. He did it once, and I was like, oh no, that's just because he's a small version of the character. And then like multiple pages later, he's still John Hamm, and I'm like, you son of a bitch. But yeah, it's fun. 88 pages, man. You get your money's worth for $7 or $8.
I know we've talked about it on the show before, but I'm really enjoying all these like Batman One Bad Day one shots they've been doing. Like each one focuses on a different, villain. I didn't put it in the notes here, but I did just read the Catwoman one that was written by G. Willow Wilson with art by Jamie McKelvey, which again, I think enough said in terms of creative team. Like, it's a beautiful looking book. Yeah. It's a great story, and it's not nearly as dark. It's it's about Cat. It really explores Catwoman, her motivation for being a thief. There's some surprisingly anti-capitalist sort of political content in there, just like things only have value because rich people say they do. And it's like Catwoman trying to she's attempting to steal something that she believes was a family heirloom, but finds out that it's not worth what she thought it was. And it's a really interesting, well done story. And I think what's nice about these one shots is that they're not really about Batman. Like Batman shows up for like 3 pages at the end, but the story about Catwoman, really exploring her as a character. And again, Jamie McKelvey drawing Catwoman is a fantastic, fantastic thing. So that's one I would definitely recommend if you're looking at more of these one shots.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to read more DC comics, Paul, but that's what I'm saying. My top of my pile might be a big surprise for everybody. So let's actually get into that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about books that are on the top of our pile, comics that are new or old or just been sitting on your shelf so long. You're like, I got to get to this. It's about time. So I guess let's jump back over to you, Paul. What's on the top of your pile?
Well, I think you mentioned it last week, Mike, and I happened to be at the library and saw a copy, so I grabbed it and checked it out, and that is Monsters by Barry Windsor Smith. This is the gigantic book. It's literally a monster. It's so big.
Paul's showing it to us on camera right now, and I forgot how big that book is. It is.
You could kill someone with that.
I was at the library just looking for something. I needed something a quick read, and this is on the shelf. I was like, oh, there we go. So
that's 600 pages of monster stories, right?
And it just looks appealing. I just flipped through it, and I love Barry Windsor Smith's artwork. It's all black and white, pen on ink, pen on page, ink on black and white ink artwork. I've never read a lot of his stuff, but I remember being a teenager and reading Weapon X for the first time and it blowing my mind, just the way Barry Windsor Smith can draw the most exquisitely illustrated violence imaginable. Like that book, Weapon X book, is not for kids. Like it's so bloody and violent. And this book is something that he's been working on for a long time. I think decades. He's been slowly working on this as a labor of love. It's published by Fantagraphics. It's a standalone story, not superheroes. And just based on the few pages I've read so far and the sort of synopsis on the back, it's kind of like a horror comic with some thriller aspects. It's set in the early 60s. And this young person has joined the military. He's signed up to be a volunteer for the army. And he gets recruited into sort of a secret part of the army that's doing some genetic experimentation. Turns out that program can be traced back to Nazi Germany. So it's, kind of a heavy read. Sure, it's going to be pretty violent. Should be kind of dark. But if anyone, like I said, can pull off some like really, really jaw-dropping, beautiful artwork that is also very bloody and violent, is Barry Windsor Smith. So I'm kind of excited to check into this. It feels a little different from what I normally read. So yeah, looks great.
Yeah, one day I'll get to that. I'm sure. I promise. One day I'll get to it. It's one of those books from Fantagraphics that I'm like, God, if only I had like a week of clear thinking, then I could probably sit down and read this book.
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel you there. Yeah. So there are certain books where it's like, I need to be in a certain headspace to be able to do this.
Right. So Zach, what about you? What's on the top of your pile?
Top of my pile is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin, The Lost Years #1. Kevin Eastman, art by Tom Waltz and Ben Bishop. I don't know if you guys read The Last Ronin when it came out this past year, but I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Maybe it's that like edgelord grimdark teenager in me, but I love dystopian stuff. Sure. I love dark dystopian stuff, and I love the twist of it. I was very happy with the choice of who the surviving turtle was. I thought it was one that made the most sense and was the most interesting. I won't spoil it here for anybody, but I'm really excited to read this. I've been avoiding seeing anything about it because I don't want to know what the story is. The one thing that did get to me was that at some point we're going to get a new crop of turtles. I've seen the images of them, like the drawings of kind of what they look like, and I've heard about the names, but I've avoided the story of what's going to go on here because it sounds like we're going to get a lot of what happened to X-Turtle in between, what went down that led to the last Ronin, and I'm really excited to fill that gap, and I'm really hoping that they turn this into its own universe and just keep it going, because this is a really interesting story with what's happened to these characters and the introduction of the new characters that we've gotten, like the child of April O'Neil and Casey Jones, and it's a lot of fun. And I, as much as I love like the other things that they're doing with the Ninja Turtles, like I've been checking out the Ninja Turtles Power Ranger crossover that they were doing recently. That's just silly fun though, you know. But
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is I like maybe it's again the grimdark in me, but I like when you take the fun silly characters and introduce them to awful terrible things and see what
Right.
happens. And that's what we're getting here. And I'm really enjoying the process and seeing Eastman back at the reins playing with these characters again and doing something new and interesting. And I really hope it continues. I really hope it continues.
Yeah, I'm very much eyeing this book as well. I'm probably gonna wait till it's done and read it as collection because I really liked The Last Ronin. Like Nick put it on our Patreon only best of 2022 series that we did. I should say that I did, where I read everybody's picks for the year and then just screamed into a microphone for 55 minutes about them. But I really enjoyed reading that book from start to finish. Like, again, the mystery of who was the one turtle and seeing, I mean, Kevin Eastman's art in that previous run was just perfect. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Kevin Eastman's art and sometimes, but the way that it was used in that series was just like chef's kiss beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be curious to see if he's going to do more art in this new run, and just to mix things up a little bit, because I'm right there with you. Like, I think what was established in that first volume, or that first like collection, is good as a standalone story, but they did more in that universe. Totally is going to be a blast. It's going to be a lot of fun.
For sure. And you're right. They gave you enough there that you could see it front to back. Okay, we're done here. This was a fun thing to play in, but there are so many possibilities with this whole new world that they've got here. And I'm curious about other characters who maybe we didn't get to see yet. Like what's happened to them? Did they survive? That kind of stuff.
I just want to know what happened to Krang. That's it. That's all that I care about.
That's really sweet. Somebody's got to care about Krang.
yeah. Well, let me talk about some of the folks that are hanging out with us here at Discord this week. We got some people reading books as well on the top of their pile. Paul G is reading J.M. Ken Nomura's Never Open It, the Taboo trilogy. Jeff is reading 100 Demons, which is part of our Goodreads reading challenge for this year. Someone picked, which is very exciting. And Danny is reading Poison Ivy. I think I'm assuming that's a new series that's coming out or something, or maybe ongoing. I don't know. He just said Poison Ivy and then disappeared from the chat.
That's all I'm here to say, folks. I'm out.
Oh no, he's here. He was talking about Wolverine, anyways. But for me this week, I'm excited for Superman for All Seasons. This is written by Jeff Loeb, art by Tim Sale, letters by Richard Starkings, colors by Bjarne Hansen. For those of you that don't know, this is a coming-of-age tale that witnesses the experiences and adventures that transform a simple country boy into the world's greatest hero. Told through the course of 4 seasons in the Man of Steel's adolescence life, it illustrates that it is the person, not the powers, that makes Superman a hero. Someone was talking about this recently on an episode, a couple episodes back. I don't remember who, but they said that they were reading this book, and I was like, "Oh man, Jeff Loeb." We're talking about the Long Halloween and like the same group. I was like, "All right, let's try this out." And I don't really care. I'm just gonna dive into this like that creative team. Given the time when this came out, this is before Jeff Loeb kind of like dipped in terms of his writing quality, which is a whole myriad of factors. I know that go into that, but I know that this is peak Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale working together. So I'm very excited to try this. I mean, I know this is a classic book, and even just some of the covers and some of the things that I've read about, like inspired by, some classic Americana art and stuff, and getting these shots of Superman up in the sky just to show like the scale at which Superman works. I'm very, very excited to see it and to see more Tim Sale art that's not just Gotham,
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that team.
Mm-hmm.
They're one of those teams that if their name was on a book, I was going to read it. That's the only thing that this might be controversial. The only Tim Sale art that I never could get behind was his Catwoman. I don't know why, but the Catwoman bothered me.
Sure.
But everything else, I love that guy. His art is phenomenal, and him doing Superman instead of Dark Batman is solid. It's solid stuff.
That's why I'm very excited. Paul, have you read this before? I assume you have, right?
I have to admit I have never read this because I'm only really familiar with the bad Jeff Loeb comics. I feel like every time I try to read something by Jeff Loeb, it's like not good. And like I'm not as big of a Long Halloween fan as most other people are, and I don't like Hush, but I do love Tim Sale. So like I should make a point at least to look at this book, if not,
Yeah, I mean,
if anything
it's
else.
only 4 issues, you know, at the end of the day,
Exactly, yeah.
you know, you could read more with worse quality, you know?
That's true.
True.
I have, yeah.
But yeah, I guess let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the topic that I threw on this document months and months ago, which is what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. It's Valentine's Day, because when this episode comes out, it'll be the day after Valentine's Day, and IRCB is anything if not timely. So you've already experienced Valentine's Day. Now let's talk about comics that'll break your heart. So we'll be back in just a second to talk about that. For our show this week, we are talking about a very odd topic that, again, I said in the first half, I wrote down a couple months ago, thought it was fun, and then I completely blanked on some options for it. So we've all been scrambling to put together some books that we talk about today. But the topic was, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. It's Valentine's Day. Comics that'll break your heart. Thinking of that classic Jack Kirby quote. And I found a wonderful picture actually online for the Discord event that we did of something that Jeff Lemire drew. That's like this kind of ghostly, haggard-looking version of Jack Kirby saying that. I thought it was pretty cool. But yeah, so I asked Zach and Paul to find some books that will just break your heart, and I found some that maybe make your heart heal again. And we're going to talk about it, bounce around a little bit. So I guess to get us started, Paul, what's one of the books that you had on your list that kind of fit this criteria here, and why'd you pick it?
Well, I mean, it's probably no surprise to anyone that's listened to the show regularly and had heard me talk about it, but obviously the first book I thought of was Love and Rockets. Love is in the title of the comic itself, and it's one of my favorite comics, and there are many different stories in the larger Love and Rockets, series that I could point to. I think Death of Speedy is a great love story. I think Wigwam Bam is a great love story. But the one that I wanted to highlight here is one I've talked about on the show, because I think it works as a standalone story. You can read it without having read the entire 30 plus 40 years of Love and Rockets. And that's The Love Bunglers. And that's by Jaime Hernandez, focusing on the characters Maggie and Ray. Maggie, of course, is kind of the main protagonist in Jaime's Loca's stories that center on Maggie and her friends. And there's a lot of great stories about Maggie and Hopi in their relationship, but The Love Bunglers focuses on Maggie and Ray Dominguez. And if you've read Love and Rockets, they have a very on and off again, aren't they sort of relationship. They keep falling back in each other's lives at different times. And like this story is kind of like, I remember when this story came out, because being serialized when Love and Rockets is basically an annual story. So like every year you get like a OGN size collection, 100 pages of Love and Rockets stories. And like this story coming out was like when I had caught up with the rest of the series. I'd read everything else up until that point. So seeing Maggie and Ray finally sort of reconnecting and like realizing no, we are a couple. And like, they're brought together by a sort of tragedy that I won't spoil. And there are moments in this comic where, and I'm trying not to get choked up talking about it, but like there are moments in this comic where you see their entire relationship on like 2 pages, where Hernandez draws, Maggie as an infant, Maggie as a child, Maggie as a teenager, Maggie as an adult. And on the other side of the page, because it's the 2 opposing pages facing each other, you see Ray at the same age looking at Maggie from across the pages. And you realize that you, as a reader, if you've read Love and Rockets, you've seen all these moments, and it's almost like you and the characters are having the same exact memories. And it's a really beautiful moment. And I think this story, and I think, Mike, you've read this story, like you can read it as a standalone story. You don't have to have read Love and Rockets in total, but if you have it, the impact is so, I had to like put the book down and like go for a walk. I'm like, this is too much. This is like, it's like better than any love story I've seen in a movie, blah, blah. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I think if Jaime Hernandez had ended Love and Rockets, or his version of the Locust stories at that moment, it'd been totally satisfying. Thankfully, he kept going and has kept the story going since then. But it's a beautiful, beautiful example of Maggie and Ray as a emotional sort of couple. I do want to say, as a trigger warning, this story does have flashbacks that feature sort of sexual abuse and child abuse. So be aware of that. I think it's handled well. It's not exploitive, but like that is something that maybe if you're not ready for it, could trigger something. But I think it's a beautiful story. I think it is probably if not the best, one of the very best examples of why I love Love and Rockets as a series. So I don't know, Mike, you've read this too, so I don't know if you have any
No,
thoughts.
I was very pleased with. I think we were at Emerald City. They did like Fantagraphics happened to be doing like a very high quality collection of that specific story, and we both grabbed copies because Jaime was there, and which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I remember just bringing that home, putting it on my shelf, and then one day just being like, all right, like I did this, I bought this because Paul said it was good. Like, when has Paul ever let me down? And so I sat down, and I remember I read that all in one sitting and just felt flabbergasted because I had read some previous Love and Rockets, right? Like I read some of the earlier stuff that I think you see these bright neon colored collections of different stories that the Hernandez brothers have done together. And some of the vibes of those early books definitely don't like it's unbelievable to think that the book where it started gets to this story of this extremely high quality, very emotional, very like unbelievably like gripping story. Not to say the old stuff isn't like that, but it's it feels like a different book. And having only knowing, I know who Maggie was, I knew who Hopi was, and that's pretty much it. And still reading that book, and I felt like I had witnessed something. Like when you go to a very serious, dramatic movie and you leave feeling moved. Like that's exactly how this book makes you feel. And you're totally right there, Paul. Like the heartbreak is there. Like it's, I without going into details, like there is a lot to that story, and it is devastating by the end. And it's like, holy shit, how do you continue your book after that? I imagine that Jaime has continued to make it very interesting, but still, like, holy smokes, like what an achievement for him to be able to tell such a strong story and to hear that the payoff is there for multiple year readers. And then for me, who just kind of jumps in, it feels just as it like feels very moving as well. Like it's an achievement by Jaime by, to be able to put out a book like that. So, yeah.
I think that speaks to it because I know there are a lot of people that are deep Love and Rockets fans like myself that will point to that saying a book that came out 30 years into the story being like, this is the best that Jaime's done. To be like that, to be that good, to be like, I can still show these young punks what a real comic is like, to do something so monumental. And like, there are certain pages and panels in this book that I just like, you only get there for having told the story for 30 years. You know what I mean? You couldn't just sit down and do that. So it's a tremendous, tremendous book.
Yeah. So what we're saying is, Zach, when you decide to do your big deep dive on Love and Rockets, you give Paul a call. He'll be there for you.
That sounds. I was just sitting here thinking, like, oh damn it, I'm gonna have to spend so much money on Love and Rockets. That's a lot of time. You have piqued my interest with that. I'm very curious to learn more about that. I'm not familiar with that book at all, so I am very curious to learn more.
I mean, it is a commitment. I think Love and Rockets can be daunting because the best way to get through it is start from the beginning. But it's like it's not any different than any other superhero franchise where it's like if you can jump in with Spider-Man, but having read more of it makes it deeper and more involving. So
Well, luckily, I have 30-hour plane rides in my near future, so
there you go.
Maybe I'll have to pick up some Love and Rockets.
There we go. I like this. Well, Zach, I guess what's one of the books you had on your list here for comics that break your heart? And I guess why'd you pick it?
Okay, well, God. So, caveat, folks, I am not just a Spider-Man guy. This is purely by accident. But
Sure,
honestly,
whatever, Mister. I'm wearing a Spider-Man T-shirt. It's fine. It's fine.
And Scarlet Spider. It's both of them. Leave me alone, Mike. I quit.
All right, we got him, folks.
So honestly though, like I had to leave this. I thought about taking it off because I was going to be talking about Dark Web, but when you told me the theme for this episode, it immediately sprung to mind. And this book's from 2002. It was a single issue, and I immediately thought of it. And so that's why I'm pulling it out here. Teenage Zach really got tugged on his heartstrings by The Amazing Spider-Man number 39. It was entitled Meanwhile. It happened during the Nuff Said event at Marvel. If you're not familiar with that, it was an event where Marvel editorial basically challenged all of their creators to write an entire comic with no dialogue. No dialogue, no word bubbles, nothing at all. Just the art to drive the entire story and get the point across. And this was J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr. So it's a pretty formidable duo for writing Spider-Man. I mean, Straczynski, some people like his stuff on Spider-Man. Some people despise him because of what he did with Spider-Man. But I'm one of the ones that enjoyed it. And this issue comes on the heels of a few issues before this. Spider-Man and MJ are taking time apart because Their child had died during the Clone Saga, and she had been dead for a while. Like a lot of traumatic things have happened to MJ. So she's like, I gotta take some time and be alone. I can't deal with your Spider-Man life. And at the same time, Aunt May has just finally, after 700 years, figured out that Peter is Spider-Man, and they have that come to together moment where he now has to explain himself and Uncle Ben and all this stuff, and so this is literally the next issue, and
wow.
so Straczynski's got to get these characters and continue this process, these stories with no words, and they do a masterful job, in my opinion. So we just get a day in the life, basically, of all three of these people, where we get MJ. At this point, she's a big movie star, and we see her wake up in the morning, and just like the way that Romita draws her, you can tell that there's stuff like kind of weighing on her, like this, like her life and everything. And she sees Peter swinging around on TV, and just the way that she stops and looks at the screen, it's really clear that she misses him. Like you could see in the art, like that is what they're trying to get across, that she sees him, she misses him, but she's at this point where she's not ready for it yet. So she's locked to the screen for a couple panels, and then she just shifts and walks away from it. And through that's the moment that really got me as far as heartbreaking. When I thought of heartbreaking, because as long as I've been a comics reader, Mary Jane and Peter are the couple for me. Like that. Yeah. I love that. I will even admit here, I tried to find this, by the way. I was going to read it on your damn show. I wrote a poem as an angsty teenager about wishing I had a Mary Jane Watson. I shit you not. I will admit it. I was going to read it on your show to make you understand this, but I couldn't find it. But so that moment was the heartbreaking moment for me, because it's clear that like she still wants to be there with him, but that she is just not ready emotionally yet to come back together. And so you also get this great Aunt May stuff where she's at the public library on the internet and she's looking up things about Spider-Man, and she's canceling her subscriptions to newspapers that talk poorly of Spider-Man and sending them emails saying like, I think you should give him another chance and you should do an editorial. And like, that's so sweet, so it's kind of like two different heartwarming and heartbreaking relationship things going on. And at the same time, you just get Peter doing his daily Spidey stuff and winding up back in bed. And so that's why I picked that one, because that moment with Mary Jane at the television and her going through life, and they show a lot more of her than anyone else. And it really puts the point across that she's just trying to keep going and trying to process her life. And at the same time, trying to not just jump back into this relationship that has caused a lot of harm, but she wants it back at the same time. If that makes sense.
Yeah. This really reminds me of, there was an issue during the very long Dan Slott era of Spider-Man when I was reading for a while, right? And because I'll admit, like, I read Spider-Man for a couple of years, right? Like during the 3 issues a month era, when you were getting like Spider-Man every week, it was crazy.
So much.
And there was an issue where it was like I think back-to-back issue, or back-to-back issues, where one issue started with Spider-Man. It was like, no one will die in New York City. Like that was his thing. And so he was like flying around trying to like make sure that everyone was safe. And I think the one person that ends up dying is J. Jonah Jameson's wife, right? And there's this one-off issue where like it's just Peter being like, of all the people in the world, right? Because his relationship with J. Jonah Jameson at the time, I think, was like kind of, it wasn't as aggressive. It was very like they were condoning each other. And then Peter, of course, makes this big claim that he's going to save everybody, and he makes it publicly, right? And then, of course, the person that dies is J. Jonah Jameson's wife, and so Peter has to both be Peter Parker and Spider-Man handling that. And I remember that issue. I'll have to find exactly what issue that is, but I remember that just being like devastating. I was like, I didn't think a Spider-Man comic could ever move my heart. What the fuck is happening here? But it's good to see. It's cool to hear that like that writers have been trying to make Peter Parker emotional like stories for many years, right? I mean, especially J. Michael Straczynski, we could talk about all day, because I think who could forget One More Day? I mean,
people have tried.
Yeah,
many people have tried.
Many people have tried. Let's not even talk about that.
Vincent in the chat actually is telling me, I think I might have had the issues backwards, that that when Jana Joe Jameson's wife died, that was when he made the promise that no one else will die.
Right.
That's what it was. So
that would make sense.
Yeah, that makes more sense. So thank you for that. But yeah, anyways, sounds like an interesting issue. I mean, I remember the Nuff said thing being an ordeal right before I really started to get into comics, and I think I've gone back and I've read collections where those issues have come up. Like I think there's an issue of X Factor or Extreme X-Men. That's what it was, the Chris Claremont series that had an issue like that. That was very, very good. But yeah, I guess let me talk about one of the books that I had on my list. I'm going to go into some of the books that have devastated me in this last decade that people have recommended to me, like, hey Mike, I think you'll like this, and then I'm like sitting here crying on my couch like I can't believe that someone made me read this, and I'm so glad that I read it. But one of the books that I had on my list was Waves by Ingrid Schabbert, with art by Carol Morrill. And this is ultimately a story about like fear and heartbreak of potentially losing a child, like if you've become pregnant and then you lose that child. The story kind of goes through this wishy-washy, like, is this real? Is this not real? Is this someone's worries just manifesting? Is this actually something happening? And I don't want to completely spoil it, but the focus of the story is the two parents, like these two women who are very deeply in love with each other, and you can see it in the way that they react to each other, where the one is not doing well with this and the other maybe is, and then they switch roles as they're trying to handle this idea of potential heartbreak and then maybe eventual heartbreak. And there's a lot of, like, again, kind of fuzziness as to what's real and what's not. But man, reading through that whole book, seeing this extremely tough and very, what I think is realistic journey, because I believe some of the story is pulled from Ingrid Schabert's like real life, as she put it into this story, and it's so just like powerful and moving. It's very devastating at the same time. I remember just leaving the book just feeling like overwhelmed, needing to like go lie down afterwards. But it's very good because you see like the strain on a relationship when it comes to like creating children in this world and seeing this couple kind of strain on things. And I don't know, again, it's very heartbreaking at the same time. So yeah, if you're looking for something that's just going to emotionally wreck you, it's a great book. I know I've talked about it on the show before, but I can't not bring it up when we're talking about this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know if you guys read this. This was on, I think, a list at some point, but like, or a couple lists that we've had for the show in the past. So, but I recommend it if you're looking for something that's just going to knock you out.
I'll definitely be adding that to the list.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Paul, what else do you have on your list here? You guys actually have some superhero books. I'm very proud of you for that, because I couldn't think of any.
Well, I have to admit, this is honestly one of the first books I thought of when I saw the topic for this episode, and it seems like an odd pick, but it is Thor, the Mighty Avenger, which is an 8-issue series that came out in 2010. It's written by Roger Langridge and art by Chris Samnee. I think this is the first time I saw Chris Samnee's artwork. I think it's one of the first books he did. And like, if you're used to seeing him do Daredevil or Black Widow, this is very different. This is very brightly colored. It's still unmistakably Chris Samnee, but it's a little bit more, superhero. It's Thor, and this is basically an origin story. I think maybe came out around the time of the second Thor movie. I don't know. I feel like they were trying to tie into the film franchise at the time, but it really focuses on the young Thor who's been exiled to Earth by his father, and he's trying to determine why he was exiled and whether he's worthy enough to pick up Mjolnir, trying to what his father wants from him. And he very quickly befriends Jane Foster, and the big moments in this book really focus on their relationship, like them meeting, and then there's moments where Thor will just leave for a while, and you get like Jane sort of longing for him to come back. This idea that if you're a human person meeting a god who is interested in you, like what would that do? Like it's a meet cute in the world of Thor. It's a very touching romantic story. It's very much an all ages book, and I feel like if this had come out a few years later than it did, it would have been like one of those OGNs that came out aimed at a young adult, all ages sort of book. I think at the time it wasn't selling, so it gets canceled after 8 issues, which is actually what's heartbreaking about the book. It's very cute and very heartwarming, but what makes it a heartbreaking book is the fact it was canceled.
Hold on. Hold on. If that was the prompt, I got a shitload of books on my shelves that we could be talking about.
Yeah, can we start over?
And I think it's a book that's kind of slept on because it wasn't very popular at the time. But I think if
Sure.
you want like a Thor story that's not tied to continuity, it's a young Thor, it's a young Jane. There's a moment where Thor comes back after being gone for a while, and he's got the chariot with the goats, and he pulls up in the sky, and Jane's like, well, what are you going to do now? And he just says, I want to show you wonders. And it's like Thor is trying to live his life, seeing the world through Jane's eyes, through a human's eyes. And it's very sweet and very touching. So it's one of the books that make me think I really like Thor. It's a character that I never read regularly, but like a story like that is a great standalone example of what makes the character work. So it's a great book. It's one to kind of go back to regularly, actually, to reread. So
That sounds fun.
That's really cool. I was just looking up some of the art for this because I really wanted to see what some early Chris Samnee art, right? Especially over at Marvel. I know he's doing stuff before that, but I found a specific panel, and it's still very Chris Samnee, but it looks a little bit rougher than what he does now, and I kind of really like the look of it. So maybe I'll check this out because this sounds like a pretty fun little cute book.
Yeah, and it's I thought about it because of their relationship between Thor and Jane, but it's 8 issues. There are other stories where it's like Thor meets up with the Warriors 3 and it's kind of slapstick. Like Roger Langridge did like the Muppets comics around the same time. And it kind of has that vibe where it's like humorous and tongue in cheek at times, but yet still a Marvel book. So I think it's a sleeper hit for sure.
Definitely. Zach, what's another book on your list?
Well, everyone just soak in the feel good moment that Paul gave you because it's gone now. The book that I brought is called The Love She Offered. It was a Source Point Press and Comics Experience. Comics Experience is like this. It's like an online learn how to do comics thing, and then they help you get some stuff published sometimes.
Cool.
So this was written by Glenn Moan and Tirso Yanetta, and this book. It's gut punch after gut punch. That is all this story is. Trigger warning: there is a lot of talk in this book of like explicit sexual content. There's also torture involved. The death of a child. There's a lot of stuff going on here. This is a very adult book, but it is such a horrendous story about what happens when your child is taken from you and murdered. Your child is murdered and you think you know who did it, and that they are getting away with it. At the crux, like that is what this story is about. Like your child's murderer is getting away with it, and how do you deal with that? And this family, the way that they deal with it is by kidnapping that person and forcing out the admittance of guilt. Oof. And it gets really hairy and really ugly. There are a ton of swerves that you don't expect coming, and not good swerves that lead to a happy ending, because this book does not have a happy ending. This is a very dour finish to the book, where throughout the whole thing, they're really like all the characters involved. There was really only 2 good people involved. One of them is dead. The other one is kind of riding the fence because it was his idea to kidnap this person to beat the admittance out of them. So like it's a really good read. It reads like a movie,
sure,
even more so than a comic book. The way that it's scripted and the characters that we get and their relationships with each other, because there are a lot of really rocky romantic things going on and things between each of the characters, and they're all trying to deal with that while at the same time honing in on getting this guy to admit that he killed this girl. And it's a wild, hard read. I will tell you that. The Love That She Offered, it's not easy. It is not easy.
Gotcha. I don't, you know what? I'm going to say I don't want to read that, but you've intrigued me. And
I don't blame you.
I don't know. Cause I kind of understand like it must feel like it's like satisfying, but also grim at the same time. So like interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'll check this out. I haven't read a lot of Source Point Press books. There's a whole rant that I could go into about like some of these IP farm companies that I think exist. And I don't know if Source Point Press is one of those, but like AWA, I think is one of those. And I'm kind of just like, if you're just trying to make a movie, why aren't you just making a movie? But yeah, but this sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to look this up.
Sure.
I was looking at the preview on Simon & Schuster's website. The art looks pretty good,
Yeah.
So maybe the book is good. Who knows? I'll take your word for it, Zach.
Good. I don't know if I would call it good.
Sure.
But it is a well done, well executed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, let me talk about one more book that I have on my list. I feel like I'm rehashing a lot of books that I've already talked about on the show before. Forget Me Not is another book that I really loved. This is by Alex Garland. If you haven't read it, I will say there's some warnings, like the book circles around dementia and memory loss and like familial loss. It's a very heavy book that has a lot of very light moments that I think like make it the perfect like up and down type of roller coaster. But one of the book that I'll talk about last here is Extremity by Daniel Warren Johnson. This book is extremely violent and it's very much everything you love about Daniel Warren Johnson. But the core of this book about like trying to find a solution to in a violent world with nonviolence is extremely moving. And like the characters that are developed in this book, like I don't want to even like go too deep into the plot. It's like it's the coolest concept of like in the future everyone's riding air bikes and everyone's got huge swords and guns and everything's explosive because it's Daniel Warren Johnson and all you can hear is just like the like Mad Max style like action adventure music. But at the center of this book there is like an extremely like powerful emotional like connection between the main characters, and I loved it. Like the idea of the story is someone loses an extremity and like it like goes from like super violent to like this introspective look that you have to like turn around and be like, how do you make an immovable thing move? It's really, really cool. And it's Daniel Warren Johnson. I just don't know what else to say other than that. But like this book has it moved me in a way that I hadn't felt moved by a comic in a really, really long time when I read it. Like it took me totally by surprise how much the story actually made me feel like both broken up and relieved about like what had happened in the story. So like if you want a comic that's going to break your heart, this one works, and it's Daniel Warren Johnson and it kicks ass. I mean, you can look at some of his other stuff like Murder Falcon and the wrestling book that he just did,
Do a
that
Powerbomb.
Do a Powerbomb.
That was the first comic to ever actually make me cry. Was Do a Powerbomb.
Daniel Warren Johnson really knows how to make comics that are fucking super cool and also will like break your heart. But like Extremity is one of his earlier books, and I think that one does it better than any of his other stories have since then. So if you're looking for some, that's a good one. Did you guys have any last books you want to talk about before? I actually brought some books that like you might enjoy because they're about love and they're not going to break your heart. So did you guys have anything else on your list?
Yeah, I got one more devastating one since, I had a heartwarming one. I'm going to bring it back down. The End of the Fucking World by Charles Forsman. I think I've talked about on the show years and years ago.
Yeah.
I really love this book, and it's about two teenagers that run away from home, and it's like this thing where it's like it's that teenage romance where they not sure, they're driven by hormones and emotions, and like you can't tell if Alyssa actually likes James, the two characters, and like they argue a lot and they don't seem to get along. But at the end of the book, what they go through brings them together. And I don't want to spoil anything, but like the last few pages of the book are just so heartbreaking because you realize they actually did care for each other. Alyssa really did love James in a very specific way. And I don't know. I feel like I can't talk about this book without giving a bunch away, but it was well adapted into the Netflix series a few years ago, which is one of the more successful, I think, adaptations from a comic to a TV show because they ended up changing a lot to make it unique, but they kept the core of that story the same. Where it's like, the whole book, you're like, do these people actually like each other? You're not sure, and at the end, they really do. It takes a lot of tragedy for them to realize that, and they go through a lot of pretty dark stuff, but as a story, I think it's, again, a book I go back to again and again because I think it's a very unique take on that sort of teenage, are they in love or is it just lust and kind of romance? And it's a fantastic book.
Funny enough, if you want more Charles Forsman in your life and you don't want to read any comic books, you can listen to his Bat and Spider podcast that he does, which is a weird show that's like about like D-level horror movies.
Oh, yeah.
And they've been doing it for a couple of years. It's supposed to be very good. I haven't listened to it, but I know people that do. If you're in the 70 millimeter crowd, you've definitely heard the people talk about it over there. But yeah, it's a fun little series if you're into like weird dark horror stuff or old like B-level to D-level horror, like I said. Okay, I do want to just do a couple quick plugs for like some other books that maybe won't break your heart. They're about love that's just in like a very nice positive way. One of the books is Bloom. This is from First Second by Kevin Panetta with art by Savannah Ganachow. It's a post-high school story about suddenly finding love when you're like about to leave the city that you grew up in. And then suddenly someone stumbles into your life and you're like, maybe I should question everything I've ever believed. It's very, very cute. It's a super positive story. I love that. And the art style is very cute from beginning to end. Highly recommend that. And then the other one I'll plug is Boy, I Love You by a group of authors called the Yam Fam. It's an anthology of boy love stories that's very popular in Japan, but these folks are all like made a bunch of Western comics, just little short vignettes about like boys coming together and like holding hands and maybe having a kiss here or there. And every single story is really wholesome, but they take place in a variety of different places. Like one of them is a mecha story, about two mech drivers and cool. Maybe they're in love with each other. And one story is about a boy who like goes to visit Hawaii and he falls in love with someone and wonders like, should I move here? Should I change my whole life? But it's really, really good. It's really cute. And you can buy it on their website. They used to be all like Comixology Submit stuff, and now I just don't know where to get it digitally. I think you can buy it directly from them, but I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And it's a very, very cute book. And then the last one, I guess, I'll also plug Fangs by Sarah Anderson. I know I talked about it a bunch when it was on the show or when it came out, but I feel like that's a very like love positive story about a vampire and a werewolf and just all the bits and jokes that Sarah Anderson could come up with about how a vampire and a werewolf would be, in a relationship together.
Yeah, that's a very fun book. Very cute.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess to wrap things up here, any final thoughts on comics that'll break your heart? Otherwise, Zach, I want to give you a chance to plug your stuff one more time. If there is none, that's okay. We've definitely talked about a lot of books that are going to make us all cry. So,
for sure.
Zach, I guess round us out here with where people can find you on the internet, and then I'll jump into some credits here.
Too cool. Thanks for having me, guys. By the way, this has been a blast. I really enjoyed this. So my shows, I apologize to my pal Chad. We also do a show. I have 3 podcasts. There's TFD Nerdcast, where we talk about nerd news and rumors and movie reviews, that kind of stuff. Then there's the Comics That We Love, which is me and a guest sitting down each week talking deep dives on a single book. We got Comics and Beer, which is me and my buddy Corey drinking really, really, really good beers, talking about them, but also talking about, cool comic stuff like superhero day jobs and things of that nature. You can find me on Instagram at the Comics That We Love. That's really the main one. That's where I stick the most. There's also at Comics and Beer Pod on Instagram or at TFD Nerdcast on Instagram and Twitter. Those are the places where you can find me. Again, this has been great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll make sure to get all those links from you and drop them in our show notes for folks that are interested. Go check out all of these podcasts. I've listened to some episodes of the Comics That We Love, and you've reignited my fuel and wine to go back and reading like things like The Winter Soldier and go rereading Saga for like the 5th time. Like the deep dives that you take have been miraculous for me, who just surface level reads everything. So I very much appreciate your show.
Nice.
Next week, though, you can expect me and Tia and Ray. We're going to be talking about comics. Who'd have thought? It's going to be a fun time. I'm excited to get Tia back on the show for the first time in a while, so that'll be great. As always, you can check us out on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord. We've got a Goodreads group that's going. People are flying through our Goodreads challenge right now, and it reminds me I need to catch up. I need to get in on that. I've got so many other books to read. People keep sending me recommendations and I just don't have time for it. But you can always email me, ircbpodcast@gmail.com with your comic book recommendations, and I'll read them and give honest reviews when I finally get around to them, I promise. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/ircbpodcast. Someone was asking in the Discord when we're going to do a tabletop RPG as a podcast, and that's a Patreon goal. So if we hit that goal, we'll do that tabletop RPG. Who knows? I'll probably run it and it's going to be a mess. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Can't thank them enough. Xander. I want to say thanks to Zach and Paul for being on this episode with me. Thank you to everyone hanging out listening to Discord. Thank you to Brian, who proof listened for this episode in the booth. And if you got this far in the episode, thank you to you. You're a true comic book fan. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.